All right, so welcome everyone to the wrap up of our fall CSC PD series. Many of you will know that we were not able to get together at our regular annual face-to-face conference venue in June, just due to the pandemic conditions. And I know we were all disappointed not to be able to meet in person at Niagara College this year, especially because it was at Niagara, and that's such a favorite place for many of us to go. And of course, we had booked Joe Roberts to come to our face-to-face conference. Since we had to postpone that, Joe very kindly agreed to do a virtual keynote address for us as a bit of a preview to what we hope will be a follow-up in-person session. Best case scenario, that happens this June. But again, with the pandemic conditions, we're not totally sure of how things will come together for June of 2021. But we'll think a good thought and think positively. And Joe, one of these times we will see you in person. So I will just briefly again ask you to make sure that you're muted, and I'll keep an eye on that too. If anybody accidentally unmutes, I might just mute you. We are very, very pleased here today to be able to welcome Joe Roberts. He is our virtual presenter today, and as you'll see, is an Ontario College alumnus and has an honorary doctorate from Laurentian University, which is in Sudbury. Joe is also the winner of the Courage to Come Back Award, and he was recently awarded the Meritorious Service Medal from the Governor General of Canada. So big congratulations, Joe, on that medal from the Governor General. Joe's life, however, hasn't always been quite this good. And he was, in fact, 25 years ago, pushing a shopping cart in Vancouver's notorious downtown east side as a homeless addict. As Joe was mentioning earlier, he does still live in Vancouver, but fortunately in much better circumstances. Joe's story is one of absolute perseverance, determination, and the resiliency of the human spirit. And in today's world, I think we can all use an uplifting message around those things. Joe is a living testament to the idea that anything is possible. And I can tell you that Robin and I have very much enjoyed getting to know Joe over this last number of months as we've made plans for both this keynote and hopefully his face-to-face address at some point in the future. So with that, I would like to turn it over. Ladies and gentlemen, please do welcome the Skid Row CEO, Joe Roberts.
Thanks, Barb. First of all, I just want to say that I'm just honored and thankful to be here today. The work that you, Barb, and Robin have done to make this come together. And I also want to say, just before I get started, that the bio reads really well, but I'm here today because of over 10,000 people. I'm here today because there were people in my corner cheering me on that helped pave the way and change the trajectory of my life. So, you know, the wonderful thing about a story of transformation is it always looks like, you know, that one person pulled their socks up and got on with it, but that's simply never the reality. I'm here today because there's so many people who were there to speak possibility and to help me see, you know, greater potential for my life. Now, I'm also excited to speak with you today because the context is really good. You know, 25 years ago, I would have been a client of yours. And it was, you know, I've got a chance to share my story all over Canada and the US. And sometimes I share my story into places where the fit isn't very good. But today, I think the fit is really good. In fact, I know it is. And sometimes, you know, I feel awkward and weird at these conferences. I go to them and I'm like, well, why am I going to see this group? And that happened to me about 2 years ago. I was speaking to the Alberta Engineering Association. I was driving in a little rental car. I got a flight into Calgary and I was driving up to Red Deer in this little rental car. And I'm thinking, what is it? You know, I used to be homeless. What does a guy who was homeless and lived under bridges and tunnels for 10 years of his life say to the Alberta Engineering Association, people who build bridges and tunnels for a living? And the best thing I could come up with was thanks. Keep up the good work. Anyways, I love humor. Humor is one of those things that I think is in short supply these days. And yet there's so much to laugh at. So, you know, if there's one little piece of advice I can give you when you're going through the crap storm that is 2020 is look for the funny. Look for the funny and share the funny, because When we laugh, when I hear laughter, when I ran my company and I heard laughter, I heard audible hope. Laughter shifts the context of things that we're looking at. And it allows us to see the world through a different lens. And I think it's one of the most powerful weapons that we can take to adversity today. The greatest weapon I have to help connect people to purpose and to inspire you is to share my story. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to pull up PowerPoint and I'm going to walk you through a slide deck that hopefully when I'm done will leave you inspired, but also give you some tools to take back into your role, not just in the college or professionally, but also in life. This talk is about connecting to purpose, and I think that. Oh, by the way, I just want to point out I have more than one tie, but it seems that I'm wearing the same tie on the screen as I am. Just wanted to clear that up. I want to talk about connecting to purpose, and the best way is to go back to September 1992 when I walked onto the campus at Loyalist College. Now, when I walked onto the campus at Loyalist, I had a lot going on. You know, I reread your newsletter that you sent me, Robin, and I think it was Dave Weiss from St. Lawrence wrote an article in the spring newsletter, talked about fear. And I really relate to that article. When I walked onto the campus at Loyalist College, I remember feeling a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear, as do many students. But I had a lot of stuff going on that you couldn't necessarily see on the surface. What had happened just a few weeks prior to my enrolling in the marketing program at Loyalist was I had done an equivalency test and I barely passed that equivalency test to allow me to enter into the business marketing program. Otherwise, I would have needed that upgrading. And so there I was, you know, with sort of my big boy pants on, going into this program that seemed very intimidating. And I had this feeling like I didn't belong here. And I remember feeling very out of place. I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. What people on that campus didn't know, and I kept my cards very close to my chest, is that 6 months prior to that, this is what I looked like. I was one of those guys that lived in the downtown east side. You'd see in the inner city. You know, I struggled with drug dependency. I struggled with a long history of mental health issues, homelessness, poverty. You know, I was one of those people that was, you know, the most vulnerable in our society, the kind of challenges and roadblocks that you see every single day and the students and clients that you work with. Now, what ended up happening for me is I had some really great teachers. You know, I remember my first sociology teacher was Bernie Belanger, and he was awesome. And then Hans Kruger and Brad Berger. But there was one teacher specifically, his name was Tom Thorne, and he ran the marketing department at Loyalist. And as the weeks went on at Loyalist, I started to sort of find a groove through the fall semester. But by the time I got into February, I got into that midwinter blues, which I know that you know about. It's that phenomena that happens in that college system where, you know, well, not just college, but I hit a patch where everything was really hard and I wanted to quit. Now, what was interesting about my relationship with Tom is that I had let him know my past, my history. I had told him a little bit of my story because I wanted him to understand the context of what was actually going on for me and what was difficult and why it was difficult. But one day I walked into his office, and it was actually a Thursday afternoon, and I had made my decision to quit. I was going to quit school. And I went and I sat down and I said, you know, Tom, I don't really think this is for me. And so Tom sort of queried and asked me some questions, and I had this paperwork with me that I needed him to sign in order to take it down, I guess, to the registrar's office and exit the school. And he said, you know, Joe, he says, I really believe in you. And I normally, you know, I would listen to the case of a student who wants to quit, and that would be it, and I'd sign the paper and away you'd go. But he says, I'm not going to do that with you. He says, instead, I want you to take tomorrow off, which was a Friday. He says, I want you to come back on Monday and just think this decision over, because it's a big one for you, considering your past. And, you know, what he was really afraid of, and I found this out later, is what would have happened to me if I exited? Like, what was waiting for me? I came back on Monday and I was just determined to quit. And he said, well, I'm not going to do it. He says, I'll tell you what, instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make myself available. I'm here for you if you need to talk. I'm here for you if you need, you know, help with any of the curriculum. But I'm not going to give up on you. Now, one of the things that I've talked extensively about over the last 2 decades is the word possibility. Possibility is the thing that we as leaders, teachers, parents, coaches speak to. When I look at an individual in front of me, I don't see what's there, I see what's possible. So that's what Tom saw. He didn't see what was there, he saw what's possible. See, one of the ways our brains work is we get really good at recognizing patterns. And so the past often predicts the future. And so we get really good at recognizing, well, if it was like that, it's likely going to be like this. But possibility is that taking a step of faith and saying, and using our imagination to speak to what could be, right? What could be. And this is what we invest in when we invest in that person in front of us. Whatever role we're in, is we invest in that possibility. And Tom invested in my possibility and made himself available. And I don't know if he ever really understood the impact that had on me. Because for the first time in my life, I had someone in my corner. You know, I didn't believe in me. I walked around half my life with the analogy I like to use. It's like my house had dirty windows, you know, and the light from my soul couldn't get out and the light from out there couldn't get in. But working with Tom and in that context of possibility that, you know, Einstein calls it imagination, right? You know, knowledge is one thing, but imagination is everything. Seeing something in someone and helping them find the doorway to it. Over the next weeks and months, I put my head down and I started work. The other thing that Tom taught me when I sort of calmed down emotionally, he says, you know, Joe, he says, it's normal and natural for you to feel anxiety and want to quit and run away from things that are hard. But at the end of the day, the world will judge you by what you do, not by how you feel. He says, so it doesn't matter how you feel, it only matters what you do next. And so we built a game plan and a set of action steps, very simple things that I could follow in order to keep me on track. And something wonderful happened. You know, we got through February, we got into March, you know, the sun hit, the snowbanks started to melt, and I started to do really well. And I finished up that first year. I re-enrolled again the following year, and something, you know, I had a bounce in my step. Now I had confidence. Now I began to believe in myself. Anyway, short story. Finally, on a beautiful June afternoon on the campus at Loyalist College, they called out my name. They said, Joe Roberts, Dean's List. I graduated the top of that marketing program, top of my class. And I remember I walked across the stage at Loyalist, and I walked down to where my mom was sitting, and she gave me a kiss on the cheek, and she said, I'm really proud of you. And I hadn't heard that a lot growing up because I'd made a lot of mistakes, and that meant the world to me. And I remember afterwards going up to Tom in the courtyard behind Loyalist, and I thanked him. Nice hairdo, eh? Actually, I'm growing it back. I remember going up and saying to Tom, you know, you really believed in me, and I want to thank you, because I don't know where I would have ended up had I quit. And, you know, he acknowledged that, but I think in some ways I don't think he really understood the magnitude of what he had done for me and how much that mattered in my life. He was simply showing up for work. doing the job that he loved to do. Well, those words that Tom gave me, I took to heart. That idea that it doesn't matter how you feel, it only matters what you do. And after graduating, I headed out into the business world. And I put my head down and I worked diligently. I got a business partner. I started to build this small technology company. And I came up for air 6 years later. And I remember the day vividly. I came into my office and we had about 50 people working for us in this extremely fast-moving technology company in Vancouver that I was at the helm of. And sitting on my desk was a copy of Canadian Business, and I was on the cover of it. In less than 6 years from graduating, you know, I was the Canadian version of the American dream, simply following that sage advice that Tom had given me. And you know, to put some icing on the cake, the following year, I got a call from Doug All from Loyalist College to come back to Ontario to be given the Ontario Premier's Award in business. So, I mean, here's this story of a kid who had every roadblock and challenge, but thanks to a guiding light and a, you know, compassionate hand and a lot of action, I managed to sort of navigate those roadblocks and find my path. What was interesting at this point in my life, however, is that I was no longer satisfied or connected to what I was doing. You see, I was an entrepreneur at heart, and I had built a company to my level of incompetence, and I was no longer having any fun doing it. And so in 2003, my daughter was born, and I decided I wanted to leave the tech world, the business world, and I wanted to follow a passion of mine to help develop people. One of the things that I love more than anything in the world, and I know you can relate to this, is when you facilitate or help somebody and the light goes on for them. That moment when they get it, you know, that to me is bliss. That's pure joy. And so I left the business world. I unplugged and I sold my controlling shares to my business partner, and off I went into the world of consulting and speaking, a world where I could do what I'm doing today, to speak to people, to impact groups, to impact managers, to impact organizations, nonprofits, government, to share ideas that really help change the trajectory of one's life and shift perspectives. And one of my very first business partners was just a completely unlikely business partner. His name was Dr. Sean Richardson. And we couldn't have come from more polar opposites. I was living on the streets, addicted to drugs, made every conceivable mistake. I was the guy who understood from a consulting management perspective, from a behavioral science perspective, I understood what got people stuck. I understood sort of that emotional, psychological, and situational roadblocks that'll get people stopped in their tracks, and what one can do to sort of overcome them. Sean saw the world through a completely different perspective. Sean was a sports psych, so as a behavioral scientist, he understood the mechanics of the mind, but he also understood how to be the best in the world. You see, Sean was an Olympic rower, and for 10 years he competed at an Olympic level. So here these two guys came together to form this, consulting management practice to, help work with people, to help them find their possibility, help connect and engage people. And, it was this wonderful synergy. What was interesting is even though we came from completely different backgrounds, we shared a similar purpose or why, which was, to help people realize a greater potential for themselves. What was very interesting about my relationship with Sean is that he taught me some things right off the bat that were absolutely brilliant that I didn't understand. First of all, he taught me three things. He explained to me sort of the mechanics of how our brains work. And the first thing that he explained to me is that one of the reasons why we don't do well, especially in an environment like 2020 and COVID, is that we're not designed to thrive in adversity. We're not designed to do well with so much change. You know, there was a conversation before we jumped on the call about the number of different technologies we're using today to communicate with people online. And that's burdensome. And I'll tell you why. Because we don't like to expand extra energy on things that we don't see as necessary to our survival. You know, maybe Shrek thinks change is good, but we don't, at least not at a mechanical mind level. And so because we are designed for survival, we have this fight or flight mechanism Sean explained to me. And so if we don't have to put that energy out to actually survive, then we basically reside in this place where lazy is normal, right? Because we want to conserve that energy in case we need to fight or run away. So what that brings us to is this idea that high performance is an abnormal state for people. And why that was fascinating to me is, I had done a couple of things that were pretty high performance. In fact, anything that you've done in 2020 and everything that we've done in 2020 has been in a high performance state. It's one of the reasons why we're feeling stressed out and burnt out, is because we've been operating at such a high level of embracing and trying to adapt to change that it gets exhausting after a while, because we find ourselves in a natural state. High performance isn't necessarily, being an Olympic athlete. High performance for a student can be trying to figure out how their iPhone is going to connect to Zoom with a crappy internet connection so they can make their call into you. And so when you continue to throw roadblocks in front of that, it's natural for us to revert back to this state. So that's the bad news. The good news is that when we connect to purpose or a deeper reason why, we can find that next gear, because then we move away from that survival part of our brain and we move up into our neocortex. So it was in this sort of context that Sean and I were working on an account. And ironically, it was a group of social workers who were burnt out and disengaged and stressed out. Sound familiar? And as we began working our magic and pulling together our different intellectual property and ideas, Sean sort of opened up and began to sort of pour through his thesis, the work that he did to get his doctorate. And what we were trying to do is we were trying to cobble together a behavioral change model that was simplicity on the other side of complexity. Something that people could take away, remember, stick on the side of their computer, but it had the components that helped them connect to purpose and move through roadblocks. And this is what the two of us began working on and then eventually shared with this client. And the model was very simple. It's called AIR. And the components of AIR were A, which stands for action or accountability or process, the things that we need to do. I stands for inspiration or purpose or passion. And R represents the situational and psychological roadblocks that get us stopped. And then possibility is simply that thing that we imagine. For me, in the beginning, it was graduating college and then later in business. So we create this mental picture of a possibility and then work backwards through the model. So when we began looking at this, one of the things we realized right off the top is action, or the things that we need to do, are generally easy to identify. Right? I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. What's a little bit more elusive is the inspiration or the why. Why am I doing this? Yeah. This becomes crucial when you want to have a long game. You want to create long-term behavioral change. You see, if we're not tethered to the why, action falls off. If we're not connected to the inspiration of the thing that moves us forward, it's really easy to get distethered, discouraged, because without that connection to purpose, we invariably and always hit those roadblocks. And the roadblocks, again, we look at 2020, roadblocks are those things that have been thrown in, they like 2-3 of them a day. And it's just been non-stop. So yeah, I'll pause here for a second. One of the things I want to acknowledge is if you're feeling some of that, maybe you're not, maybe you're thriving, maybe you just absolutely love this. This is great. So much change. And, good for you. But there's a large swath of folks out there that are feeling stressed, feeling burnt, because we've just had so much of this. And so, if I was with you in person as a group, I'd break you into groups and ask you to do a simple exercise. And that would be to ask you, what do you absolutely love about your job? If you were to describe sort of the purpose or the why of why you go to work, what does it look like? You see, when we begin to connect into that, that helps us to push through the situational and psychological roadblocks that get us stopped. Now, the interesting thing about the AIR model as a dynamic is it's fluid. And what I mean by that is, when we look at it here on the screen, our actions or our process accountability connected to our purpose, our inspiration, our passion, or what Simon Sinek calls our why, will help us overcome those roadblocks, things that are painful, the challenges, both the personal and situational roadblocks that we have to produce that possibility, result, or goal. The problem is that oftentimes what we find is we get into action, we're connected and inspired, we take some steps forward, but then boom, we get hit with a roadblock. And when that happens, our action flattens. And then it becomes difficult to sort of take that next step if we don't have a way to sort of inflate that. And that's where I believe that purpose becomes invaluable. Let me give you another illustration that really kind of ties it together. And it's a simple one, and it's one that many folks can relate to. Have you ever in your life taken a health and fitness goal on as a challenge? Have you ever said to yourself, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, or I'm going to do the sun run. I'm going to do the 10K sun run, or whatever. I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to, quit eating poorly. I'm going to quit smoking, whatever it is. It's a common one. I know I've started and stopped 1,000 of those, right? Until I understood this model, oftentimes I failed. And it wasn't that I wasn't disciplined. It was that I wasn't connected to something that would help me continue long term. So what often I would do in situations like this, and it's a really great example because we've got, those New Year's resolutions is a great example, right? I remember, 10 or 12 years ago, I decided I was going to take up jogging again. So I went out and I bought myself a pair of sneakers, and I put on the calendar the days I was going to run. And I didn't have an accountability partner, which that was a mistake. But I went out and I got into action. So I went out and I went for my first run. And when I came back from that run, I felt inspired. Wow, look what I did. And, I thought, oh, this is great. And so I went out and I did it the next day, and I did it the next day. And I did it. Next thing you know, it was like, maybe January 12th or 13th. And I had been doing well, but then I hit a lull, right? And what happened for me is in that lull, I didn't have a big enough reason to move forward. My goals were very superficial. In fact, this is one of my pet peeves with the health and wellness industry, is that the goals aren't connected to a deeper, more resonating purpose. They're too surfacey, that, lose 20 pounds or, run a race. Well, if you run a race and then you've run the race, the impetus or the eye to run the race is gone. So what is the likelihood that you're going to continue to exercise? If the why or the inspiration is deeper, like I want to be healthy in my 80s for my grandkids, that's a deeper level of inspiration, because it doesn't matter how much action or inspiration you have, eventually you hit those roadblocks. We all do. You walk down the road of life, minding your own business, doing real well, and then all of a sudden, boom, adversity hits. And maybe it's just adversity between our ears, an old story, you know. And when that happens, oftentimes it collapses. Now, the only way for us to get back on that horse is if we have a deep resonating purpose to connect to. And if we do, we can collapse that, get back into action, and get on with it. And so that's what I meant by it's fluid. Now, what I loved about this AIR model is that we taught it to those social workers, but then we taught it to about 22,000 people over the next several years, managers, and we taught it across 15 different industry sectors. And by connecting people to a very simple model in a various different workshops and forums, we saw a level of engagement go up because people were doing their jobs connecting to purpose, connecting to the reason why at a deeper level. And this worked everywhere from frontline all the way up to the C-suite, right? And so we saw this dynamic begin to play out where we were actually moving the needle on behavior change, corporate engagement, profitability, creativity, workplace environment, like right across the board, the KPIs were tick, 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 they were positive, right? So, you know, it was a success, and it's a model that, you know, I was incorporating into my life in various different forms. But there came a time when both Sean and I really took this AIR model to the test. And both Sean and I have a heart for helping young people, especially kids that come from traumatic environments, kids that have all the possibility in the world, but they come from impossible backgrounds. And one of the things that I've got a, you know, really big heart for is, you know, helping to support young people before they fall through the cracks, getting them the things they need, like education, housing, mental health support, addiction support, you know, all these things that are antecedents to homelessness. And so together in a partnership with Sean and with the help, love, and support of my wife, Marie, we built a charity. And the idea behind this charity is that we wanted to raise money and awareness to support a conversation on what we could do to end youth homelessness in Canada. And we decided to take that AIR model and say, will this really work on something big? I mean, something huge, not losing 20 pounds or, you know, building another, you know, a business thing, but something that seems so big, so hard, and so difficult. And so it was in that context and conversation, we talked about how could we impact the entire country? How could we create an engagement strategy that would raise awareness, raise money? And so we began knocking around different ideas. And it was in that context where Sean said, well, why don't you run across Canada, Joe? And I remember looking at him at the time. I was 45 years old and I was 280 pounds. So about 80 pounds heavier than I am today. And I said to Sean, I said, why don't you run across Canada? This idea of running across the second widest country in the world didn't appeal to me. But I had spent a number of years in this possibility mindset. And so he says, okay, maybe don't run, maybe you walk across Canada. I said, well, how would a walk across Canada be any different than so many other walks? And he says, well, why don't you push a shopping cart? It's a symbol of chronic homelessness. It's the very thing that you're trying to avoid for every young person in this country, to get them the help and support they need to change the trajectory of their lives so they don't end up on the street like you did, pushing a shopping cart. And I like that idea. So between 2012 and 2016, we built a campaign. It took us 4 years because there was a ton of work to do and we were juggling careers at the same time. Finally, the day came when myself, Marie, and a team of folks found ourselves in St. John, Newfoundland at Cape Spear, the most easterly point of Canada. In front of me was over 9,000 kilometers. To say there was roadblocks in front of me is an understatement. To say that we'd overcome roadblocks to get to that point was an understatement. But how we managed to get just to that starting line was by taking the necessary action steps, connecting to our purpose or our I. And every time we did that, we were able to overcome both the psychological and situational roadblocks that were in front of us. On May 1st, 2016, I started walking across Canada. Every morning I would wake up and I would walk 24 kilometers. At the end of the day, we would usually visit a school, do a news interview or two, managed our social media, bed down for the night, and I would get up and I would do it again. 6 days on, 1 day off. Almost 5 months later, I walked into Ontario with over 3,000 kilometers behind me, and I was met at the border by the Ontario Provincial Police, and beside Marie is none other than Walter Gretzky. Through the province of Ontario was the most engaged province in the country, largely because we had the support of the OPP. We also had support from numerous colleges, Georgian College, Canadore College, Lambton College, Loyalist College. Those are ones just off the top of my head, but we had support not just from colleges and police, but agencies and frontline support and healthcare and government and unions. And it just, and we spoke to over 100,000 young people. This is a picture of my hometown, Midland. And we were walking down King Street with the kids from St. Teresa's and, you know, dropping a message of possibility and what they could do locally to address some of the issues that face every little town in this country. Then we had this big parade when we walked down Yonge Street, where we met at Yonge and Dundas Square, where Michael Pinball Clemens, you know, did this, you know, crazy talk for us, and we raised like $20,000, $30,000. I remember being in the middle of this campaign, and there were many days where, you know, it was like this, where it was just, it was so awesome. There was tons of people around. There was a lot of days where it was just plumb hard. This is a picture of me near Michipicoten, which is near Wawa. By the way, I chose to walk over Lake Superior in the wintertime. So one could argue I am a bit of a glutton for punishment. But on those days when it was difficult, when it was really, really hard, I connected to why I was doing it. And it wasn't to have these big events, and it wasn't to make money, to raise money, and it wasn't for personal glory. I was connected to all those young people that I met along the way, and you know, and what it meant if we could create a change for them. When the campaign was done, it took 17 months. I'd walked 11,375,000 steps, or 9,000 kilometers. And as I mentioned, I walked over Lake Superior in the dead of winter. I was February the 12th was when I was in Wawa. So for those of you in the north, you know what it's like up there. The question I got asked all the time from the media was, Joe, how did you do it? And I found that question really interesting because they were looking for one answer, which was just some sort of life hack on how to be successful, or, you know, or how to, you know, do the impossible. The reality is, when we are connected to a deeper sense of why, a purpose, it helps us walk through those storms. And when it was difficult, this is a picture in Sault Ste. Marie, when it was difficult and snowy and cold, especially around Lake Superior when it was -40 in the dead of winter, I drew inspiration from the conversations I had with young people that I had met along the way. And I remember one in particular happened when I was in Halifax. I got a chance to have this very small meeting with this group of young people who were in a closed, safe facility in called Phoenix House, which is a house for youth at risk. And I remember in that meeting, you know, I shared a little bit of my story, and then we went around the room and the young people shared a little bit of their story. And there was one girl in particular who shared her story, and it was just the stuff that she had to persevere through in her short 15 years in life was just horrendous and heartbreaking. And I remember at the end, her honest self-disclosure of her life. She looked at me, almost baited me with cynicism, and said, "So, what do you say to someone like me?" And I remember looking at her and saying, you know, you aren't who you think you are. You are not the sum of things that have been said to you, things that have happened to you, or things that you believe about yourself. you are so much more than that. And if you have the courage to stay the course and to keep your little feet moving, there is no telling where you can go and be in life. I told her what Tom Thorne told me. And I said, it doesn't matter so much how you feel, it matters what you do next. And so when I was out on those roads and it was stormy, you know, it was that conversation, because when I gave that information to her, what happened was she got it. I saw the light go on. I not only gave her something to think about, but in some way, you know, there was a connection to her heart. And when I was out, you know, in the middle of the winter, pushing that shopping cart, I would think of her and some of the other kids that I met along the way. We took that AIR model and we put it to the test, a most difficult test. And basically every single morning I would get up and I would take those action steps. I connected to my why. And by doing that, I overcame the limitations and roadblocks, both between my ears and the physical ones that were in front of me. When we started the Push for Change, we created a possibility of making change and raising dollars. And we went far beyond anything that we could ever imagine possible. In fact, we got an opportunity to sit down with the federal government and help shape policy. But there's a danger that I want to call out around connecting to purpose. There were many, many days when I was on the campaign where I felt that what I was doing wasn't enough. Even though we'd raised well over $1 million and we spoke to 100,000 young people and we had 500 events and we were in every newspaper across the country, I still felt that no matter how much work I did, it didn't matter. And the reality is that is a false belief. Because in the end, the work that we did and the work that you do absolutely matters. You know, last year I got a call from the Governor General's Office of Canada, and they informed us that they thought I had done enough. And they gave me the Meritorious Service Medal of Canada, which puts me in some pretty special company. They give this out to folks in the military, distinguished Canadians like Colonel Chris Hatfield. And I remember when I got the award, I thought, you know, this is nice, and you know, I was humbled, but I thought about how many people actually share this award with me, because this isn't for me. This is for every member on the team of the Push for Change. This is for Sean, and this is for Marie, and this is for every volunteer we had. But even further than that, this award belongs to all those people who were there for me in the beginning, like Brad Berger, Bernie Belanger, and Hans Kruger, and my good friend, Tom Thorne. And to some degree, you. The work that we do matters. And if I was to stand in front of you, every single student that you've impacted in your life, and you were able to see the manifestation of what it was that your career stands for, it would overwhelm you. And I'm certain it would move you. I'm here today because there was somebody there for me in the beginning. On July 26, 1991, I began a journey from the downtown east side, searching for the better part of me. And I found it, thanks to the better part of you. And so I want to just say thank you for the awesome, incredible work that you're doing. It's enough. And on behalf of me and my family, I want to wish you a happy holiday, a Merry Christmas, and an extraordinary 2021. And as a special little thank you, We are going to get a chance to meet in the spring or the fall or whenever. I'm committed. As Barb mentioned earlier, I'm committed to coming, and I want to meet you in person. I'm really looking forward to that. And when we do, I'm going to share a little bit more about, sort of what happened back there and fill in some of the gaps on some of the other stuff that I didn't do today. So there's lots more to share with you. But I wanted to give you an early Christmas present, and so for everyone on the call today, and even for those who didn't make it, I'll leave that up to Robin and Barb, is I want to give you a free e-copy of the book, The Push for Change. It's encouraging, it's inspiring, and it's my special thank you to you for the extraordinary work that you do. So again, thank you. You're muted, Barb.
There we go. Sorry, I thought I unmuted. I clicked it too many times. Joe, I'm almost speechless after listening to all of the things that you told us today. I feel like there was a few very emotional moments, of course, and how could there not be in a story such as yours that you're relating to us? And I think that there's so many different takeaways, but certainly a few, a couple that I noted in particular was that you are definitely a sucker for punishment. If you walked across Lake Superior in February, that's just way out there. So well done. I found myself just being really also grateful of the many references to Ontario, not just because we live here, but because we are a group of 24 colleges across 80 different sites. And it was fun to see some of our places reflected in your story, not just hearing your words reflected as well. I think that your journey has been incredible, and we're honored that you were able to share it with us today. I think it goes without saying that we're very much looking forward and really hope that you'll be able to join us in person in the near future. Before we wrap up, I just would take a look at the chat. Lots of nice comments in there. And if anyone does have a particular question for Joe, we do have a few minutes. I'm going to scroll back up a little bit.
This is Pellegrino, just to be clear. I was drinking it the other day in front of a client. They said, "Are you drinking wine?" I said, "No."
Yeah, it could look like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to say before you field a question or two is that I have just scratched the surface of the AIR model. So in a package that I'm going to send to you, Barb and Robin, is going to be the access to the book, but also some follow-up resources for those folks who want to see a little bit deeper into the intellectual property that both Sean and I developed, in hopes that if you want to use it, it's fantastic. You can use it yourself. You can coach through it. It's absolutely brilliant stuff. So happy to share that.
Well, and many thanks, Joe, for making the ebook available to us. I just read a comment in the chat that that said this is the best hour someone has spent outside of that with family in quite some time, and many people looking forward to the ebook, myself included, of course. And again, just scrolling through the chat a little bit just to see if there was any particular questions. Heartfelt presentation. Oh, and Veronique Charbonneau from Collège Boreal says, "I remember you walking through Sudbury."
Yeah. Espanola too.
Yes.
Evelyn, yeah. Espanola was a special little trip because Espanola, for those who don't know the geography up there, you've got to come off 17 and go down into Espanola. And when we got to just on the other side of the bridge, all the students were waiting for us, and we walked through town, and they had done some fundraising before we got there. It was, yeah, Espanola was pretty special. It was nice to get off Highway 17 too, because it's a little crazy up there.
Oh yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, I see Evelyn's comment there now about Espanola as well.
Yeah.
Just continuing to scroll through, and yeah, lots of thank yous. And although maybe this is self-evident, your journey does mirror that of so many of our students and clients that we have worked with over the years. And earlier in the chat, Glenda put, it's all about working with our students and being able to make a difference. So your personal story resonates with us, but also the broader context of the enormous struggles that some people have, and their great need to have people in their lives that can make that difference, like Tom Thorne originally did with you, just to get the ball rolling. And I have no doubt with our colleagues on the line that they have made a similar difference to a number of people over the years. So I, as Joe did, give a huge shout out to all of you who are working with our clients and students to help them see those possibilities. And I actually wrote down one.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I think to add to that is, this is a story, that's got this wonderful arc and all the pieces in it, but don't ever underestimate the power of those 5 to 10 minute interactions. There's a lot, it's still waters run deep, and one of the things that I think is so key is to when someone's going through, so many challenges trying to connect in, like I can't begin to imagine, how difficult it is for folks, for students right now who are facing so many other issues, poverty, internet connections, the external as well as the internal. It's just sort of a double whammy. And so sometimes, there might be this feeling like, you're not able to do it like you did last year, but even those small 5 to 10 minute interactions really matter. And you never know what that conversation or that interaction can actually, that seed, what it can create down the line.
Yep, exactly. And it doesn't have to be prolonged interaction. It really can be 5 or 10 minutes that can make a huge difference to someone. Absolutely.
It is. And when I come again in the spring or the fall, or whenever we get the chance to meet in person, I want to share with folks a story about a guy I met in Vancouver who spent about 10 minutes with me. And he basically had taught me, my life's mantra. Now, he spent no more than 10 or 12 minutes with me, and I never saw him again. And yet the idea that he planted is, connected to a lot of what this, and it's funny because that message was reinforced by Tom. So it's really interesting how that whole thing sort of came to be.
Mm-hmm. I also noted really early on, one of your very first comments, we aren't designed to do well with so much change. And I thought that was a really interesting way to open it. And as you noted too, because 2020 has been a massive amount of change on so many levels for so many of us. So it's comforting, to hear those words that we aren't designed for this, and we're trying really hard to cope with it. And your message today, I think, really hits home with how, we are in this together. We have colleagues, we have friends. We're in a fortunate position, most of us, but not everybody is. And that we can all use some inspiration and some uplifting in that 5 or 10 minute conversation from someone that could really make a difference.
Absolutely.
So once more, we'll just go over to the chat here. See if there was anything else we needed to. Yeah, and a comment about it. Yes, it's important to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how we learn, and we can rise above some of those challenges.
The greatest asset today that I have, and I've spoken to over 1 million young people, is the garbage in my life. And that because it's now a point of leverage. When I'm standing in front of 1,000 kids in an auditorium or 300 kids in an auditorium, and I just let it out and tell them my story, I'm able to connect on so many levels with young people. And then once you've got that connection and that authenticity with them, they actually listen. And I think that's something unique about the role that each person on this call has, is it's that ability to connect and reach someone. And so I think that when I first started sharing my story back in 1998, I was terrified. I was petrified. I was successful in business, and the last thing I wanted anybody to know was my dirty laundry. The last thing I wanted people to know was about my failures and stuff. But yeah, it turns out that that's that's the best part of it. Is the part. Ryan Walter, NHL hockey player, that's what he said to me. He says, you know, I always would tell people about winning the Stanley Cup. He says, but when I got fired from the Vancouver Canucks, that story actually resonated with people because they could relate to being fired. They could relate to failure. Nobody can relate to lift. Like, can you relate to lifting a Stanley Cup? Nobody can relate to that, but they can relate to the, you know, the falling short, the humanness, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And Sue in the chat mentioned that it's sometimes hard to tell our own story, you know, for that reason, but it really is impactful sometimes to absolutely to share those struggles that other people can relate to. Absolutely. And that clearly has been impactful in your journey. So we're just around 3 o'clock now. Again, many thank yous, lots of acknowledgements of the gift of your book. And we're grateful for that. I'm just going to just ask what people are reading anyway. Somebody isn't muted, but I'm not thinking I can find them right now. So any questions for Joe before we sign off?
If questions come in post, feel free to fire them off to my inbox, and yeah, I'll field them. Marie will get them to me, and we'll be happy to. I'm glad that you recorded this. We'll also follow up if we can get a copy of it. That'd be great, because there's always little snippets that we can use on social. So yeah, I just want to say, you know, thank you for allowing me to connect to my purpose. The thing that I get out of bed every morning is to try and have an impact, to try and engage and inspire people, touch their hearts, give them some ideas, and send them back out to do the great work that they do. In March, just like you guys, I watched my entire calendar gone in 1 week. We lost 50 presentations. Now, most of the clients we're working with, like yourselves, it's a postponement. So that's good, but still, it gave me a lot of time on my hands. And so between, you know, trying to figure out how to stay connected through Zoom and these other technologies, but I needed something to fill the void. So I just really appreciate you, Barb, and Robin, for allowing me and giving me the responsibility to speak here today.
Thank you again, Joe. We're so glad that you were able to speak to us virtually. It goes without saying that we look forward to seeing you in person, as I said before, at whatever point in the future that is. You know, we'll make it as soon as we can. So I hope that you and your family have a great holiday season, a Merry Christmas. Stay safe, stay well. To everyone else on the call, thanks so much for participating today. We had approaching 100 people on the call at different times, and no surprise, I think people were really anxious and interested, Joe, to speak with you and hear your story today. So we look forward to more. Be well, be safe, everyone, and we'll see you at the next meeting in many cases. Okay.
Thank you.